For the beauty of the earth, for the beauty of the skies, hill and vale and trees and flowers, sun and moon and stars of light, Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. Rachel Carson, in her seminal work, says so. I quote, "One way to open our eyes is to ask ourselves, what if I had never seen this before? What if I knew I would never see this again?" I unquote. What if we knew that we would never be able to see the beauty of the earth and the beauty of the skies, hills and vales and trees and flowers, suns, moon and the stars of night? What if we knew that we would never be able to see them again? This would change our whole perspective of nature and its protection. Welcome to today's session on A Fable for Tomorrow, which forms the first chapter of Rachel Carson's path-breaking work, Silent Spring. To start with, let's look at the author and then move into the text. Rachel Carson was one of the prominent modern American environmentalists. Having received her master's from Johns Hopkins University in zoology, she joined the US Bureau of Fisheries as an aquatic biologist. While there, she published a lot of articles in newspapers and magazines. Her Sea trilogy, which comprises of 3 works, namely Under the Sea Wind, The Edge of the Sea, and The Sea Around Us. So these 3 works, which are popularly known as the Sea trilogy, talk about or explores into the life, the marine life, in the depths and in the shore. This work, all these 3 works, gained her a lot of acclaim. And later in the 1940s, she turned her attention, in the 1940s and 50s, she turned her attention to the conservation of environment. She was concerned mainly about some of the problems she believed were caused by the synthetic pesticides like DDT. And the result of this concern, this research, was the seminal work Silent Spring. Although Silent Spring was met with severe, fierce oppositions from the chemical companies, it initiated a reversal in the national pesticide policy, which led to a ban of DDT, which was something that shook the entire American population and even the world. It also led to the creation of a movement, an environmental movement in the grassroots levels, which was called the Environmental Protection Agency. Now let us look at the background that led to the creation of this work, Silent Spring. Now it is said that there are 2 major incidents that inspired Rachel Carson to write Silent Spring. Now Now, as we said before, from the 1940s, she was concerned about this large-scale production of synthetic pesticides, which was mostly developed from the military funding of science after the Second World War. She was greatly concerned about that. Now, in addition to this, there were two major incidents that prompted her to do a research on the impact of pesticides on the nature. So, the first incident was in 1957, fire ant eradication. So, the US Department of Agriculture, they decided to destroy the fire ants in the year 1957, and what they did was they combined a mixture of DDT and some pesticides along with fuel oil, and they sprayed it aerially on the public and the private lands in Long Island, a place in US. So the residents in Long Island, the landowners of Long Island, they filed a case against the US Department of Agriculture. And the petitioners, they lost the case, but then the Supreme Court granted them the right to fight against any sort of environmental destruction activity hereafter. So that was the first incident, the fire ant eradication policy brought about by the US Department of Agriculture that inspired Rachel Carson to study more about the impact of pesticide and to bring about the work Silent Spring. The second incident was a letter written by one of her friends, Olga Owens Huckins. She wrote this letter to one of the dailies there. Now the daily, it is the Boston Herald. So Rachel Carson's friend, Olga Owens Huckins, wrote a letter to the Boston Herald, and she described about the death of the birds around her property, especially after spraying DDT in order to kill mosquitoes. So these two were the immediate reasons which prompted Rachel Carson to look into the impact of pesticides on the nature, on the environment, and she came up with this wonderful path-breaking work, Silent Spring. The main theme of Silent Spring is the effect human activities can have on the natural environment. Considering the harmful and detrimental effects that the pesticides can have on the environment, she called the pesticides biocides. And she looked at DDT as a prime example of this biocide. And she came up with this revelation that it does not only kill the targeted pest, but it also destroys the flora and fauna of the applied area. So DDT, in the major chunk of the book Silent Spring, she talks about the harmful effects of DDT on the natural environment. She also talks about a future possibility of pests becoming resistant to these pesticides and the evolution of newer species of pesticide resistant forms. So all these form the main crux of Silent Spring. And the book did not outrightly call for a ban of DDT, but over the course of time it happened so that it brought about a starking awareness about the dangers it can cause on the ecosystem. And finally, the government decided to ban DDT. So for this particular reason, Silent Spring has been heralded by many environmentalists. Now coming to the section that is considered for our study, A Fable for Tomorrow is the first chapter of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Now in this particular chapter, Rachel Carson describes or tells you the story of a small American town. Okay, so it is, as the title suggests, it's a fable, it's an imaginary story. There is no particular setting that is identified. So it is an American, it's a beautiful, idyllic American town. Now, what is special about this beautiful American town? It is full of greenery. It is full of abundant varieties of plants and animal life. She talks of the abundance that you find in that particular place. There is a lot of birds, there are a lot of fish, a variety of fishes. She also talks about the wildflowers that used to grow there, about the different colors spread by the oak trees, the maple trees and the birch trees. So overall, it is a beautiful place which, according to Rachel Carson, used to delight even the inhabitants of that place or even the travelers who come from distant places. So a place of beauty, a place where everything in nature lives in harmony. So what happens to this particular place? So everything goes on happily, and then suddenly this fairy tale villain comes up. Now what is that? Suddenly there is a blight happening in the place. A blight which causes a shadow of death and sickness. Suddenly you see that the birds are falling dead. Suddenly you see that the farm animals are getting sick. Even the people who live in that town, they are identified with illnesses that can't be explained. It is said that even the town doctors are puzzled seeing this kind of illness in the adults and the children in the town. She also talks about a silence creeping everywhere in this particular town. The birds start falling dead. There is no song of birds, and hence there is only silence. The farm animals, they fail to reproduce successfully. And even if they reproduced, the younger ones survived for a day or two. The apple trees bloomed, but there were no bees to pollinate them, and so there were no fruits. The lush roadside vegetation has withered. There is no life anywhere. The streams are empty and lifeless. So the streams which once used to be filled with anglers who came to fish from that stream, are now empty. The fish in the streams are dead. So this strange blight has affected the entire region. It has affected the entire locale of that American town. Now, towards the end of that section, Rachel Carson says that the thing that caused this strange blight was a white powder. And she finds this white powder on the rooftops. It signifies the aerial spraying of DDT and other pesticides which rest on the rooftops as white powder. Carson says that humans themselves are responsible for this blight. It is a direct effect of the human activity. This story, as the title suggests, is a fable for tomorrow. So it is a story, it's an imaginary story that can happen tomorrow or in the near future. And she says that because this is imaginary, you won't find all of these incidents happening in any one American town. But definitely all these incidents have happened somewhere at some point of time. As she ends the fable, she says that the grim spectre will soon be a reality if not checked properly. So that is the summary of a fable for tomorrow. Now let's try to understand this short section, this short chapter 1 of Silent Spring. The first one is the setting. As we said before, it's an imaginary American town. The setting is not specified. We don't know where this happens. It's an imaginary American town. The fact that it is imaginary makes or lends a universal tone to the story. Meaning, this story can happen anywhere if the environment is not conserved properly. So that's the first thing, and it creates the entire section creates a nostalgic portrait of life lived in harmony with nature. Now coming to the second point, the strange blight. The strange blight here refers to an effect. So The fact is that very often when we look at destruction happening, we would not be concerned about the cause, but we get to realize that event only with the effect that comes along with it. So the strange blight here is the effect, where people never cared about the causes before, but once a strange blight came in, they all became aware of that. So it's an effect that is referred to here. Now this gives it a fairy tale kind of twist, because it's like a fairy tale villain coming and slowly poisoning the whole of the American town. So strange blight is the effect, suggesting that people never think of the causes unless the effect has happened. Now coming to the third one, the interconnectedness of life. Rachel Carson's main argument is always this: nature is interconnected, environment is interconnected. You can't separate one element from the environment and claim it to be superior. Similarly, this is very closely connected to the deep ecology movement. Now, deep ecology suggests that there is an intrinsic connection between all the elements of the environment, and human being is only one element of the environment. So it is not anthropocentric, it is ecocentric. Meaning, this idea of interconnectedness of life is not human-centered, but it is ecocentric, because we look at ecology as a center of everything. We don't consider humans as a center controlling and ruling over the nature and the environment. So the second thing that she talks about is the interconnectedness of life. Let's go back to the story that we said before. Once a strange blight crept in, everything became affected. Initially, it was the people with inexplicable illnesses. Secondly, we see that the birds start falling dead. Then we see that the animals are affected. Then we see how their reproductive capability is affected. And then we see how it affects the trees and the other flora of that particular place. So everything is connected. The consequences when one part is affected spreads quickly through the community. So that is the idea she tries to convey through this particular section. Now moving on to the fourth one. Fourth one is the cause. Now what is the cause of this? Rachel Carson very clearly, very bluntly states that it is the human being who is responsible for this. Human beings are the ones responsible for this kind of an effect happening to this idyllic town. And Carson urges human beings to take up the responsibility. They have the responsibility to educate themselves about the harmful effects of pesticide and about all the activities that they do towards the nature. Moving on to the fifth one, silence. Silence is a prominent image in the whole of Silent Spring. We have the word silent in the title itself. Now, what does silence represent? Silence represents a dark future where environment is destroyed. Silence is also a symbol, and it's a symbol which is also a reminder of the dark, dull, bare world or environment caused by the human activities. So silence is a symbol here, silence is symbolic here, and that is exactly the reason why Rachel Carson says that when she talks about the strange blight, immediately comes the sentence, there was an eerie silence creeping over the entire landscape. So silence is symbolic in nature, and silence is something that is prominent throughout the entire section. So as we conclude, let's take a recap into what we said in the session today. We looked at Rachel Carson, we looked at her inspiration to write Silent Spring, the two historical incidents that led to the research of impact of pesticides on environment. And then we said that Silent Spring has been so influential that it even led to the ban of DDT in the US, in the United States. Then we talked about the first chapter of Silent Spring, A Fable for Tomorrow. We looked at the setting, which was imaginary, which is an imaginary American town. We looked at the Strange Blight, which is the effect, where we said that it is usually with the effect that people become concerned about the causes. And third one is the interconnectedness of life. We talked about the deep ecology and how that is intrinsically connected with Rachel Carson's seminal work. Fourth one, we talked about the cause, the human impact, the impact of the human activities on environment. And the fifth one, we looked at silence as a symbol of a dark future with environment destroyed. So as we come to an end, even after years, let's hope that we will be able to sing the same hymn that I sang before, for the beauty of the earth, for the beauty of the skies. We hope that we'll be able to still thank God that we have all these beauties for us. We should be able to continue singing this hymn even after years later. We should be able to sing for the joy of eye and ear, for the heart and brain's delight, for the mystic harmony linking senses to sound and sight. Lord of all, we sing this hymn to you of grateful praise. Thank you.